Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
I want nothing. I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo.
What one decides to do in a crisis depends on one's philosophy of life, and that philosophy cannot be changed by an incident. If one hasn't any philosophy in crises, others make the decision.
On June 11, 1880, Jeannette Pickering Rankin was born in Missoula, Montana, to Olive and John Rankin. After growing up in Missoula, Rankin studied at Montana State University, the New York School of Philanthropy, and the University of Washington, where she began to assist in the suffragist movements in Washington and Montana. Rankin was instrumental in the suffragist victories in both states. By 1916, Rankin had determined that she would run for the House of Representatives, a branch of Congress that had never had a female representative at a time when women weren't allowed to vote at a national level. And although Jeannette Rankin's actions and beliefs caused turmoil in her political and private life, through her elections, irregular views of war, and her proposition of radical legislation, Rankin was able to break the barrier of political conformity in the early 20th century, with political conformity being the inability for politicians to stand by their views, regardless of the disapproval they may face. Rankin's campaign promises were simple. She was fighting for the improved social welfare of women and children, and she would not hesitate to make decisions that benefited them. Rankin's determined commitment to women's suffrage in Montana played a large role in her election. Rankin had helped to create and serve as president on the first suffrage organization for Montana. Additionally, during her campaign, Rankin and her constituents spearheaded events, such as tea parties, to help register Montana women to vote, providing all the necessary resources, such as notaries and required documentation. These efforts made it difficult for female voters to forget Rankin's continuing dedication to women's rights during her campaign. After campaigning long and hard, Rankin succeeded in her fight to become the first female official in Congress. Rankin's term started unusually. On the evening of her first day in Washington, April 7, 1917, Congress was set to vote on U.S. entry into World War I. Rankin, a lifelong pacifist, voted along with 49 other representatives against the war resolution, which eventually passed with a majority of 373 to 50. When presenting her vote, Rankin stated,
"I want to stand by my country, but I cannot vote for war."
Jeannette Rankin was a staunch pacifist for several different reasons.
Her father was involved with one of the campaigns against the Nez Perce Indians in the 1870s, and he was disgusted with the way the Army was treating the Indians. So he kind of raised his family to be against military action.
But family history wasn't the only factor driving Rankin's pacifism. A lifelong feminist, Rankin felt war was unfair for women.
She has several quotes referencing that peace is women's work. And I think that for her it was, it was an issue of women seeing sons go off to war, husbands go off to war, and so that, taking on that mantle of being the person to kind of start to shepherd in peace.
Additionally, Rankin, and women like her, argued that violence allocated vital resources to the military, resources that should instead be used for the improvement of social welfare.
Jeannette Rankin believed basically that war was diverting resources that should be used for social programs like the Maternity and Infancy Act. It was diverting resources from social programs that would improve people's daily lives to the military and to the industries that supported the military.
The media demonized Rankin for her vote, branding her as a woman unfit for office. The New York Times called Rankin ignorant and weak, stating that, among other things, the representative had cried after casting her vote. This was later proven to be inaccurate.
In 1917, there were 50 people who voted no, so 49 besides her voted no. But we don't know their names, and they weren't called nasty things by their colleagues, but she was, because she was a woman.
Aside from her contentious vote against war, Rankin proposed and supported numerous counts of legislation intended to help create a better society. One such piece of legislation, the Shepherd-Towner Bill, attempted to reduce infant mortality rates. While this bill did not pass during Rankin's time in office, it was in effect from 1921 through 1929, providing federal funding for resources such as nurses, seminars, and clinics that would help minimize mortality rates. Along similar lines, Rankin was also instrumental in the start of the GI Bill, which would help give veterans aid and assistance after service in the armed forces. Rankin also committed much of her time in office to helping minors, particularly through the support of legislation that urged the government to take control of the industry by ending immoral behavior, such as the wrestling card system. This system discouraged workers from speaking up about dangerous conditions or union activities by threatening to revoke their wrestling cards, which were required for employment but only distributed by the companies themselves. With Rankin's support, decline in the industry due to this system was avoided. But as Jeannette Rankin's first term in office drew to a close, her passion for equality and peace grew stronger. After losing re-election as an independent, Rankin attended the Women's International Conference for Permanent Peace in Switzerland and joined the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. 9 years later, in 1928, Rankin founded the Georgia Peace Society, and from 1929 to 1939 worked as the leading lobbyist and speaker for the National Council for the Prevention of War. But ultimately, it was the threat of another world war that drew Rankin back to Congress. Although she didn't think much of her chances, stating that,
"No one will pay any attention to me this time. There's nothing unusual about a woman being elected."
Rankin won her re-election with 54% of the votes cast, 24 years after she was first put in office. On December 7, 1941, a year after Rankin's second election, Japan attacked the U.S. at Pearl Harbor, killing 2,400 Americans. When the news reached Rankin, she was on her way to Detroit, but quickly turned around to meet her fellow representatives in Washington to vote on war with Japan. Facing much disapproval, Rankin voted no, stating,
"As a woman, I can't go to war, and I refuse to send anyone else."
The whole country was clamoring for war after Pearl Harbor. And yet she said, you can either be for war or against it, and I'm against it. And then ask yourself, what is a person who says one thing and does another?
Rankin's decision would forever live in infamy, being the only one of its kind. Rankin's vote caused immediate outrage. Not only were the police called upon to lead her to her office, but Rankin's own brother took the time to explain that all of Montana condemned her action. But these complications were trivial to Rankin, who continued to voice her disapproval as the United States moved to declare war on Italy and Germany. Unfortunately, the horror generated by Rankin's vote made the rest of her term virtually irrelevant. Ignored by her colleagues and the press, she told her friends,
"I have nothing left but my integrity."
But while her time in office ended, Jeannette Rankin's mission for peace and increased social welfare carried through the rest of her life. The work of Mohandas Gandhi fascinated Rankin, who often traveled to India. During the Vietnam War, she created a peaceful protest group called the Jeannette Rankin Brigade, and only ill health prevented her from running once more for Congress to protest the violence. Jeannette Rankin died on May 18, 1973, at 92 years old, but her legacy marches on. A century after she was first put in office, women are following in the footsteps of Jeannette Rankin, unwilling to accept the barriers that have been placed in front of them. From the whistleblowers who exposed President Nixon's lies, to the women who spoke out against President Clinton, to the officials who brought President Trump's dealings with Ukraine to light, history has proven that political immorality will never be tolerated. Jeannette Rankin refused to stray from her beliefs, and strived to become the politician who would never be ousted from office due to untruthfulness. One can only wonder what would have happened if all American political leaders chose to do the same. From being the first woman in Congress, to advocating for social welfare, to standing at the forefront of the pacifist movement that would shape history, Rankin was never seen as a conformist. Her ferocity in striving for the betterment of all, dedication to the promotion of peace, and perseverance during her political career, as well as life, are what have set her apart as a different breed of politician, a woman who would stand her ground, no matter the consequence.